last month, Hannah was here for our rehearsals, and we were hanging out and talking, and I told her that Natalie and I were going to Georgetown, Texas, to go visit Natalie's parents. And I mentioned, I was a little bit nervous. She asked me why, and I said, well, because I knew that as soon as I got there, my mother-in-law, God love her, Lenora Hausman, would ask me what I was going to be speaking on for the High Holy Days. And of course, we arrived, and within 10 minutes of arriving, she said, what are you speaking about? I said, I didn't know. She said, well, of course, you have to speak about Israel. I said, I've been talking about Israel a lot over the last 2 years. She said, well, you're going to have a larger crowd, and they're going to want to know what you think. Is that true? Don't answer. It is true that I've spent a great amount of time over the last couple of years writing about and preaching about Israel. And if you'd like to take a deep dive into what I've been saying, please check out my blog, cskhouston.com. I think I've been pretty consistent with my views. It is really a tough time that we live in right now. For me and for many, it is overwhelming and a bit daunting to live out loud as a Jew in our day. Natalie has not always been happy about my public appearances on TV or on social media. I can't personally remember a more Jewishly existential or existentially Jewish moment in my life. There's a real kind of existential angst when people judge your virtue, your commitment to ethics and morals, based upon what they imagine of what you have or you might say about the actions of a foreign country over which you bear no real influence. It is a real kind of existential angst to read about and witness, to know that there are lists of individuals who have been threatened, hurt, maimed, and killed in the name of an irrational hatred whose target is not really Zionists. It's not just Israelis, but Jews and those adjacent to us. Too many people across the intellectual and political spectrum are caught up in stories that inform them of their own virtue and righteousness, and that indeed do tell them that those opposing them don't have a right to their own opinions and perhaps their own lives. I mean, people are really caught up. The algorithms of our lives, of our attention, of our energies are manipulated to often force and reinforce a worldview that regularly seeks affirmation, receives affirmation, and then goes on to promulgate that affirmation from those already affirming the same thing. It takes a remarkable amount of work to cut through and hear alternate points of view. And who has that patience, that time, that energy? But it is crucial to do this work. And it is one of the reasons we find ourselves here. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, excuse me, are storytelling mechanisms, meant to initiate and inspire and propagate a process we call cheshbon hanefesh, an inventory of the soul. We are storytelling creatures, and our High Holy Days tradition is built upon a central story, the story of Teshuvah. Simply put, we have the capacity to live ever more noble and meaningful lives, and we inevitably mess up. We say the wrong things. We choose the wrong times. We react with ferocity, or we get inappropriately silent. These next 10 days question that we need to be asking is, how do I reset? Because the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we share with others, the ways in which we frame the experiences of our lives and those of others dictate so much of our responsibility. And by responsibility, I mean responsibility. The ways in which we are ready and able to respond to others. The ways we are ready and able to respond to ourselves. The ways we are ready and able to respond to life's emergencies, exigencies, and opportunities. We read this morning the story of the binding of Isaac, a perennial text, a classic story that our rabbis of old deemed worthy to open the new year, every new year. As we read, after these things, God tells Abraham to take his son, his only son, the one he loves, Isaac, and take him up to the top of Mount Moriah and there offer him up as a sacrifice. Isaac does not seem to object against the ever more ominous journey. Ostensibly, he submits to being tied to an altar. Abraham raises up his knife, and an angel calls out to Abraham not once but twice and tells him, do not sacrifice your son. Abraham lowers the knife, and at that moment a ram appears in the thicket that takes the place of Isaac, and a pleasing odor to the Lord rises to the heavens. And this is the story that our vaunted and ever so wise rabbis decided was the one we should read to start out the new year. Not the creation of human beings in the divine image. Not Miriam's timbrel leading the Israelites in song, having crossed the sea. Not the moment of revelation at Sinai when God reveals the Torah, or when God simply states the divine command that we are to strive for holiness. Nope. We are given the story of how the founder of Jewish tradition, who is finally granted a child at the ripe young age of 100 years old, and then told that this child is to be offered as a sacrifice to God. And we wonder why we are known as a stiff-necked people. What are we to learn here? Why is it that our tradition would demand that this is what we are to grapple with each and every year as we begin the new year, as we set a trajectory for who we are morally, for whom we are to strive to be ethically? Well, let's dig in. Now, many have justifiably asked two questions. Why would God ask this of Abraham? And why would Abraham agree? Our interpreters have literally been wrestling with this text for 2,000 years, and their gleanings run the gamut. One classic answer is that this was the ultimate test of faith. If God is the source of ethics, and God is the one asking or telling Abraham to do this most horrific thing, then he must be willing to in order to pass the test. If he were to challenge that source, the whole thing falls apart. But the classic counter to this reading is that Abraham was not hearing the voice of God. He was responding to another voice, a counterfeit voice. How might we discern this? Precisely because he was being asked to sacrifice his son. The God of justice, by definition, cannot do this. Now, there are midrashic takes, meaning allegorical and metaphorical renderings that begin by asking about the three words that open this tale. Achar hadvarim ha'ela, after these things. Their reference point is unclear. After what things? The rabbis offer a few possibilities. For starters, they posit that the Akeidah was some kind of comeuppance for Abraham's seeming neglect to make a sacrifice of thanksgiving upon the weaning of Isaac. Or perhaps these things refers to Abraham's lack of loyalty in making a bad deal with King Abimelech by offering to him land already promised by God to Abraham's progeny. Or perhaps the fault belongs to Isaac, for God overheard, apparently, a conversation about circumcision between Isaac, whose bris was performed when he was 8 days old, and his older brother Ishmael, whose bris was performed when he was 13 years old. And in response to Isaac's somewhat Pollyannish claim that his bris was so easy that he would readily give his life to prove his worth, after these things. Finally, modern scholars claim that the entire purpose of the binding of Isaac was to put down a cosmic marker, that sacrificing our children cannot ever be an acceptable act, no matter what is at stake. I'd like to suggest something in addition. I'm going to suggest that we are given this text to grapple with, to dig into, to contemplate, and to ultimately sit uncomfortably with, precisely because it isn't resolvable. Instead, because it brings up issues of challenges to faith, an examination of its spectrum, from an open-eyed faith to a blind faith. Or maybe it speaks to this notion for how we have to be vigilant and on the lookout for false gods and false voices, or in today's parlance, bots and algorithms. Maybe the context is so intense and the resolution so otherworldly that we are presented with this impossibly resolvable story as a practice for our own lives. The promise of modern life has always been to make things less complicated. Products and pathways and hacks and technology, the hoped-for promise is that things will get easier and less complex. And don't get me wrong, I love easy. I love quiet and calm. I love vacation, especially when it involves a beautiful weather, the beach, and a drink with a little umbrella. I am a sucker for all-inclusive. Isn't that what we want? To just make life less complicated? Can I get an amen? Amen. Thank you. But to a certain extent, you know you're going to church. But to a certain extent, the purpose of these 10 days of awe is actually to make things a bit more complicated, especially if we've gone underground, shied away, become far too secure and isolated and safe. If you've been watching the news, some of the greatest calls seem to be those for calm, for stepping back, for less conflict. But perhaps we actually need more. Not more rancor, not more accusations, certainly not more blaming. We need more ownership. We need more courage. We need more people to step out from behind their keyboards. For those of you who would say that you're conflict averse, I would say, let's talk. Let's reconsider that knee-jerk reaction to avoid. We have got to get back to a place where we don't shame-slink off in the face of a conflict. Because guess who will win those arguments every time? Bullies. Bullies smell blood in the water when they see someone who is conflict averse. And they jump on and insist that the loudest and brashest, meanest and the most in your face will win. And they will, if we don't step up. We are invited by this text to step inside of it and struggle with it, I'd like to suggest, from at least 3 places. That of Abraham's, that of Isaac's, and that of God's. If we step into Abraham's shoes, we need to ask ourselves, is there room in our lives for us to follow something we feel in our kishkis, in our guts? Are we willing to take a chance to pursue something that might seem incredibly irrational, a little bit unsafe, precarious, but potentially incredibly rewarding? And along the way, staying committed to discerning where the line is. What are the things that our gut is calling us to? Are we willing to allow our kishkis to lead sometimes? Or do we always listen to and remain afraid of the downside, stuck where we are? Can we foster within us a greater commitment to curiosity, to imagine what could be next if only we were willing to make the ascent? If we step into Isaac's shoes, we need to ask, why did he allow himself to be bound? How different might this have been if he challenged his father and told him, this is not your God, Dad. This is not the voice you can be listening to. In the light of your God telling you that all the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah were to be obliterated, you protested and declared, is the God of justice to act unjustly? Where in our life do we need to drum up a little bit more chutzpah? Again, from where can we challenge our courage instead of allowing ourselves to be bound to the altar and made into an offering that silences us? Can we foster within us a greater commitment to courage, to unbind ourselves and step into what we believe and channel strength and conviction and challenge the norms around us? Now, if we step into God's shoes, as it were, we need to ask, what might it be like to be God in this moment? It brings up questions like, how do you know if people are truly loyal to you? How do you know they hearken to you, not because you're the creator of the universe, but because they believe in you and they trust that this is the right path? How do you know that the people with full ability to choose will choose you? Is there a drive or a yearning? Are we ever caught up in our desire and need to control so much that if we have the power, we seek to exercise it? What impact does that have on our relationships? Can we foster within us the recognition of ourselves as powerful, while committed to exercising the self-control necessary to lead, but not to dominate? We need the binding of Isaac, especially today, because as a society, we are losing the capacity of discernment and civility. We need the practice. We need to sharpen the skills that draw us closer to truth and its many shades. I am asking you to take these questions seriously, so it's only fair that I try my hand at bringing curiosity, courage, and commitment to lead fairly to the question that I brought up earlier: Israel. Curiosity needs me to ask the questions that revolve around the future. I want to know what the long-term plan is, even as I am comfortable in the story of Israel's construction and survival. Even as I can defend Israel's actions since October 7th, I don't know where to go from here. And here's what I want to know. Why was the South so terribly unprotected on October 7th? Why is it so difficult for Israel to effect a fundamental change in its political leadership? And why is the same true for the Palestinians? And why are we American Jews too often fair weather friends? Courage calls upon me to stake a claim which has often not been very welcome, especially today in so many liberal spaces. There's this quote from actress Hannah Einbinder, who won an Emmy award last week, that keeps rolling around in my head. In addition to words that I will not repeat or even share with a bleep, she said this: I feel like it is my obligation as a Jewish person to distinguish Jews from the state of Israel, because our religion and our culture is such an important and long-standing institution that is really separate from this sort of ethno-nationalist state. To address this quote would require an entire additional sermon. But calling upon my courage, I will say this: Hannah, Chana, Bubala, there is no Judaism or Jewish people without Israel. Every aspect of who we are is in reference to Israel. The Torah and its trajectory, our holidays and our language, the roots of the resilience and the grit and the perseverance by which we survived every logical reason we shouldn't have, is forever entwined with the land and people of Israel. There is no Judaism without Israel. My power calls upon me to stake a claim. I am tired of Israel apologetics. I'm tired of the yes, but formulation. It is such a disappointing framework to have to compare Israel to despotic countries like Sudan and Myanmar. The comparison always falls flat. And the truth is that Israel nonetheless, can and must do better. For better and for challenge, Israel is supposed to be a light unto the nations. This is what we call ourselves to. And while I do not believe that Israel is committing genocide, I do believe that given a free hand, some of its most notorious, but thank God still marginalized leaders would. Israel's safety has a direct impact on our own. Israel's becoming a recognized country of the world in 1948 is the only event in 1900 years that ended our oppression, exile, persecution, and genocide in the Eastern Hemisphere. We have 1900 years of proof that without a Jewish state, without a Jewish protectorate that casts a long and important shadow, not just from Metula in the north to Eilat in the south, or from the Jordan River in the east to the Mediterranean in the west, but for you and me. So back to Abraham and Isaac. After the binding that turned into an unraveling of sorts for father and son. At the end of the reading, Abraham calls that place Adonai Yireh, God knows. As in, only God knows. Because only God knows how all this turns out. But we know this much. We are here. Some 3,000 plus years post-Exodus, post-horrors, and post-highlights, post-building and post-destructions. We are an astounding and exasperating people at the same time. We continue to build a light rail train in Tel Aviv during a war, and yet the train is already 10 years late and probably 10 years from completion. We have fought off vicious genocidal armies, and we can't seem to create a cohesive, unified present, let alone a vision for the future. We are still alive because of grit, resilience, fortitude, sheer stubbornness, and good luck, or dumb luck. But to paraphrase Ben Gurion, we are realists who survive because we believe in miracles. We act as God's chosen and strive to be the holy people we have commanded to be. But we must never, ever take our sights off our origins. We are created like every other human on this planet, from the dust of the earth, in the image of God. We receive this text, the Akeidah, the binding of Isaac, as a special delivery each and every year. To have to wrestle with, wrangle with, to have to imbue, to imagine, not about this happening thousands of years ago, but where is the Akeidah in my life? In my personal life, in my relationship with my community, and in relationship with Klal Yisrael. You can't walk away. Israel and the Jewish people claim you, no matter what we believe about the government in Israel. So I invite you to bind yourself, get on board, and fight like heck for the values we know Judaism stands for. If we do this, Adonai Yireh, God will see that we have fulfilled the promise to be a light unto the nations. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be the future. May this be God's will. Shana Tova.